So let's talk about the Road to Serfdom. How many chapters are we in? 10?
So we are in 10 chapters. This is actually our 10th episode. The first couple of episodes, we did 2 chapters at a time. So I believe the first and second, well, technically we did the first episode is covering the many introductions, prefaces, and forwards in the book.
Yeah.
Second episode covered covered chapters 1 and 2, third episode 3 and 4, and then we did an episode each after that. After we found that these episodes get fairly dense, and even if they're not dense, we will make them that way. But in the last chapter we did, which is really, really good, actually, we did it. So we say mid-book review. There's 15 chapters in this book. We're 10 in, so obviously thirds of the way through.
Mid-ish,
right? But it's actually a really good break because chapter 10 was like packed full of stuff. It was labeled "Why the Worst Get on Top," and when we went through it, it's a question we made our audience keep asking themselves. So they actually understood why this is such an important question and why the answer to it becomes so obvious after you think about it long enough.
Yep.
And then this next chapter is going to get into the end of truth, I believe. So chapter 11. So that should be releasing next week, Monday. And that one is dense. That's super dense because it's so important today. I mean, we always try to relate all of these things to current events happening today. A lot of it we relate it to COVID stuff because obviously coercive government. I mean, COVID is the perfect catalyst for that.
It's felt really contrived whenever we've done that, because it doesn't really relate, but it's been nice, to at least force that in there.
It's hard to say that any books written today wouldn't involve some sort of COVID reference in there. But to me, we always ask ourselves the question, like, what would Hayek say today if you're around today? Not just writing this book in 1944. And obviously today I think he'd be very clearly using this COVID as an example of us freely giving away our power and rights, liberties and freedoms for that security, the false sense of security, right? Put on a mask. That is the definition of a false sense of security. I know we're not trying to get kicked off the YouTubes or anything like that, but
a Halloween mask.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's become everything he's predicted, everything he's said times like 10.
Yep.
Right. This book should have been taught in grade school, like mandatory taught in grade school.
Yep.
And I think we would have avoided a lot of this mess. That would have been the case. Because
what grade do you think would be a good, what grade do you think this would be accessible?
Definitely high school age, I'd imagine.
I think sophomore, junior.
Yeah, for sure. But it's just so important to understand, like, you can't be freely giving away your rights. You need to understand where it's come from and understand, like, Western European countries who have fallen to this stuff before. All of them said that this is not going to happen to us.
Yep.
Right. We talk about it. So right in the introduction material, he makes it very clear, written in 1944, he saw all the bad things Germany has done now twice. And he's like, it's not the German people. Don't push it off on just saying it's a German thing. It is absolutely, a trend that slowly moves toward a coercive government, especially in the arena of planning, because they think a lack of a plan, a lack of a centralized plan is just random chaos. So, it's extremely important to look at this stuff and not just say, well, it's not going to happen to us. Like, why worry about it? That's just the worst way you can look at it, I think.
So you said you're talking about Western European countries following this stuff. A buddy of mine who lives in Western Australia, she sent me this about the Premier, Mark McGowan. He's going to pursue a zero COVID policy even after his state reaches an 80% vaccination rate. So he said he's not opposed to mandating vaccinations regardless, like no matter what, for anyone, because he wants to get to zero. So again, keep in mind there's breakthrough cases or whatever that you want to call them.
Right.
But it's like that only happens in a place where people have just got completely like numb or accustomed to, like, I remember who I was listening to talk about how, because this is the thing that I keep, like, I go back and forth on, right? Because there are people who are like, wait, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, no. But there's a lot of people that just go along with this stuff. And you look at Great Britain and you look at us.
Well, so an interesting thing about in America, though, there's a lot of people who are not like the mainstream media and all the left politicians when Trump was still president were not on board with this stuff. And we've seen it in other places where, if it's a right wing government, the left wingers in that place, I believe Israel's an example of that they actually will reject it. So it is an ideological issue. But and the reason why I think it's good that, and I didn't mean to derail your stream of thought there, but Hayek dedicates this book to the socialists of all parties. So I think it is important to note right at the beginning that it's not necessarily just the left. It just happens to be the left right now.
Totally.
That it's going to take away your freedom and put you on the road to serfdom. That's the whole part. Don't abandon the road to freedom, right? The chapter 1 says the abandoned road. You're abandoning the road to liberalism. And you're now, the second chapter is named The Great Utopia, I believe. And you're trying to get on the road.
It's not just abandoning the road to somewhere, but the road that's brought us somewhere.
Right.
It's abandoning the road that built up this prosperous society. So, my point is that because you were talking about all these authoritarian like measures and stuff, and it's like that's happening. That has like, and there are these places in Europe, in Western Australia, in New Zealand, on and on, where people are like, okay, I guess it's okay. People are going to get arrested for a Facebook post, and there just doesn't seem to, and they're okay with like, I don't know. And these are also places where the citizenry isn't armed. Not really anyway. And so it's like, they don't have any recourse. They're like, yeah, sure. Martial law sounds fine, and it's like people really like, my point is that he was writing about this stuff and these same like ideas that lead to I call it getting cliffed out, right? It's where you can climb in like rock climbing or something like that, or just general mountaineering. You can climb and hike your way into a place that you cannot hike your way or climb your way out of, and someone has to come and help you. And that's what people can do. And so I was talking to someone yesterday and they were saying we're kind of getting into some of the stuff of the book here, which is fine. I mean, it's just be a free flowing conversation. We're both pretty tired and drinking, so that's fine. Happy Monday. But but they were talking about how when now that people aren't on board with some of this stuff, the government is resorting to coercion and force, and that's like going to make people go, no, absolutely not. Like they're going to see it. And my point was, okay, some people, yes, but other people won't recognize it as force because it's like they've already done the thing. They're already complying. So it's not force that applies to them. It's only force that applies to other people. Right. So it's like, I don't feel forced because I've already said fine. Like, yeah, I'm doing what you want me to do. CNN just, there was a thing, I took a screenshot of it. My phone's over there, but that I saw while we were waiting to set this up. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I did like 600 jumping jacks before we started. Anyway, but literally this is how hyperbolic is this article. It said it was easier to donate a kidney to my husband than to protect him during COVID. And it was about how all the unvaccinated people are making it where she's worried her husband's going to die at any point in time. Right. And so it's like, those are the people who are already complying, who are like, no, I already did the thing. So I'm not worried about my freedom being encroached because I've complied. You need to force them to do it. And so it's not just about recognizing force, but it's recognizing force specifically on the other people and caring about that. Like maybe, I think I can speak for both of us that if, regardless of who was in charge, if people were trying to apply coercion to even people we didn't agree with ideologically, even if it was something we wish that they would do, we would not, like, let's say a kid wanted to wear a mask in school. And, it wasn't required. And most people didn't. Like, would you be on board with the school saying, no, you have to take that off? I probably wouldn't, to be honest. I would say that's between them and their parents. But unless there's an actual, if it's just because you want them to, I would say no. But most people don't recognize, they're not, I don't think, well calibrated to identify coercion, because they're so well calibrated to comply in the first place.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, there's a good quote that I'm not going to try to find right now, but in one of the later chapters, that goes over that. It's like, when you start to build a society that gets used to these collectivist policies, these planned policies, and then a little bit, I think we need to go through planning and liberalism a little bit, like we go through at the beginning of every recorded episode. But when you get the population society used to those collectivist policies, they don't value that freedom and liberalism anymore, because you got to remember, like Hayek puts so often in the book, that freedom is a risk and responsibility. And it is not the default condition of the human being. You know, you read the Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn, it makes it very clear that we were, taken for tenors and thrown in prison, thrown in the Gulag, not because we wanted to necessarily, but we certainly didn't want freedom. So we got what we deserved, effectively. That's how two officers are able to go into a building of 100 people and just take people out with no restraint or, any pushback against them. It is not the default human condition, and that is because it is a lot of risk and it's a lot of responsibility. You have to, and when you redefine the term freedom, like I did put something in, the notes about redefining the word freedom to mean something and it's not, and it's freedom from circumstance is effectively how the planners sell that to you. It's like, you don't, if you get dealt a shitty hand, that shouldn't be your problem. That shouldn't be your fault. It shouldn't be your problem. Instead of, the more liberal, the liberal, the way Hayek uses liberal, of no, you're in charge of your own circumstances. And by allowing you all this choice and the ability to try harder than everyone else and improve your circumstances, you now are able to do it yourself rather than having to do it at the grace of a centralized coercive power. And people are just not comfortable with that anymore. They're like, well, this coercive power is looking out for me. Unless, my guy's not voted in, then, we got to impeach him because he's got too much power because we gave him all that power. But it's when we get these policies implemented, it teaches the population, that it at least allows them not to see what, I think a direct quote is there from Hayek, is they don't understand what unfreedom is.
Yep. No, he says it's only because we have forgotten what unfreedom means, I think is how he phrases it. Yeah. Yeah.
But it is teaching freedom out of the population. And that's why democracies fall is they get so used to it and then slow policies start to creep in because, again, very uncomfortable with no planning. It's very uncomfortable to know that it's just a bunch of random people, exchanging information with each other, called the free market, where it cannot be, it can be regulated, but it feels uncomfortable and it's not regulated because all these rich, evil people could do whatever they want. And you feel like you're out of control and you're responsible for all these people. And that's why you implement the policies. And then you get them dependent on those policies and they just grow and grow and grow. And then, as we talked about in the most recent episode, that's when the worst get on top, because as you explain it, that's the only logical conclusion.
100%.
That relationship.
Yeah, that whenever you mentioned like these traditions and how like the policies and stuff like change the way people think about this stuff. So in the beginning of in the introduction that Caldwell writes, he talks about how Hayek said a strong tradition of political liberty is no safeguard against tyranny. New institutions can undermine that spirit. And in Law, Legislation, and Liberty, which is something I want to read, Hayek lamented how Western democracies were increasingly circumventing the spirit of liberal constitutionalism by passing coercive legislation, typically under the guise of achieving, quote, social justice, but in reality serving well-organized coalitions of special interests. Can we talk about that?
Funny, because so we're looking at notes. We send each other notes every week and we share them. I'm pretty sure you're actually in the introduction notes right now. Am I correct?
I'm in our original notes. I'm not reading.
Yeah. So I actually pulled the exact quote you just said into the bottom notes for today because I'm like, I highlighted this too. And
Oh,
wow,
nice.
I mean, this hit me like a ton of bricks. But well, one, it hit me because he uses social justice in 1944, and I'm like, oh, if you would just know how
Yep.
we've adopted that phrase to speed.
That was 73. Well, I guess he does mention it again, but that quote's
Yeah.
from something written in 73. But yeah.
Well, he uses social justice, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, he does. And the common good, all of it. Yep.
Yeah, all the fun terms. But yeah, there, I think I also have it's quotes probably later in here, but he talks about how democracy can eventually take itself out effectively. Because people believe democracy. We went through a chapter that people are like, well, it's good and bad people that make the system. Any system will work if a good person's operating it, which is obviously false. But we can't just look at systems of government as the ultimate keeper of liberalism and freedom, right? Democracy is a tool that is best to keep our liberty and freedom. Just as the free market is a tool, the best vehicle that maintains our liberty does not mean it can't go wrong, right? This is where, I as a conservative and you as a whatever Bernie bro, I think is who you voted for last time, right? No, I think
I wrote in Jill Stein.
But this is where I think we diverge from the more Ayn Randian objectivism where the free market is always best, because I don't think she quite recognized how it can be corrupted like it is today with what we call like a cartel instead of the government being coercive. It's the powerful people in the free market who will set up a cartel where you must agree with them. There is no free exchange of ideas, right? This free capital that's supposed to be a carrier of information like a wire is. There's all this noise in the system because they're canceling people. They're saying, you cannot have this opinion and use our services. This is how you build these massive cartels who will shut out half the country because of who they voted for. Something as simple as that. 70 million people vote for a guy and all of a sudden they're racist Nazis. Yep. That is how you create, a divided country. And that's how you use, what they would consider democracy to bring tyranny. And that's what we're seeing today. I think, though I'm obviously a large advocate for free market, but something like social justice is something that corrupts the system. It gets in there, right? If you have social in front of justice, it's no longer justice anymore, right? So I think, we need to identify those terms and see how they're corrupting institutions. And there's so many, people on my side, the conservatives are like, well, it's free market. You got to let them, do their thing. It's like, well, no, it's no longer free market anymore. The free market is the best vehicle for liberty, but sometimes that vehicle goes off the road and you got to help it get back on. And I think that's when people need to stand up for principles and use these kind of Hayekian ideas to make sure we stay on the road and don't abandon it.
Yeah. Where do you like in terms of what we've read so far, it seems like he's only recently, so much of this comes from so let's make a distinction. Sorry, I'm just thinking about this. So there's the state and there's the citizenry, right? And he kind of only vaguely addresses the way idealistic people within the citizenry kind of create socialism in the state, or a working together, a collaboration of idealistic citizenry, socialists, and idealistic socialist politicians create this system, and then does all this other stuff, right? So much this, but he only really kind of touches a little bit on the social stuff of I'm thinking specifically of what Hoffer writes about, what John Stuart Mill writes about, what Tocqueville even writes about. And so why do you think that is? And I know he recently, so even just thinking specifically, so he does write about he talked about the way hatred and demonizing people and creating these villains is used. And I feel outside of the stuff in the very beginning, when he talks about how he does talk about intellectuals, right?
And experts,
that's correct. And how these people who are just so quick to get things done and they see the framework that created this system of prosperity more as a hindrance than as like, the fundamental thing that made it in the first place. But like, why do you think that is? Why do you think that he focuses so much? Like, do you think that Hayek had a blind spot to the role of like the rabble, basically, or do you think that he just only thought about it in terms of the state? Like, what do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I think his perspective may have changed a little bit on that if you're around for social media, because this amplifies the
That's a good point.
rabble you call it, but I think the instruments of power and the public square in 44 is very different than it is in 2021.
Totally.
Where the public square is just someone, on a soapbox yelling loud enough. And a lot of these people are just kind of uninformed, and sometimes there's an advantage of being uninformed and not giving your opinion. But now everyone gets an opinion no matter how well informed you are. And everyone believes that they're so well informed because they have the Google machine and they can just look up anything they want, but they don't care about the sources it comes from. So I think, I don't know if he understood how powerful this kind of social pressure would become. The people who aren't the experts, the people who aren't the people in power, the non-politicians, the everyday person who is indoctrinated by media. I mean, he obviously understood how propaganda worked.
Yeah.
But propaganda is only multiplied since the propaganda has such efficient ways to get out there. And now I think you see a struggle with the people in power because they want their propaganda to get out there, but now there are so many streams of different information that they have to shut down those alternative streams to make sure that their version of propaganda is the only thing being heard. And I think you see the powerful struggling with that right now. But I'd say, to answer your question, the power of social media to amplify all those other voices, I don't think that was possible to imagine in 1944, or really up to 1994, the last time I think he wrote an introduction to the book.
Do you think also there was, because he does get on about the universities some, he experienced this in his university, the London School of Economics, and he talks about like a lot of these Austrian like professors who are coming in advocating for socialism, and students that go to America or go to Europe and then come back to America, and they don't know whether they're Nazis or communists. All they know is that they hate America. So it seems like what made me think about that is you were talking about like he didn't know about social media, or he didn't know about it. It didn't exist. So yes, he did. Yeah, he didn't know about MP3 players either.
He was not on Twitter at the time when it came out.
Yeah, ignorant son of a bitch. So anyway, but yeah, and I think also there's probably a part of it where the universities weren't completely corrupted.
Oh yeah.
The cathedral didn't really fully exist yet, because he was in the Hayek's in the university, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's people like Milton Friedman. I don't know. I mean, he met Mises in university, I think. I don't know if Murray Rothbard was in that scene.
Mm-hmm.
But there was just, and a lot of the really cancerous, outside of like Keynes and this guy that who's the guy that he talks, Lasky, Professor Lasky, that goober that he likes, that commie goober he likes to quote. But I mean, outside of that, a lot of the people, especially the postmoderns, hadn't really come on the scene yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, even people like Keynes read the book and gave it a good review, and they were like ideological opponents. At the London School. So I think there is more of a reverence for the other side, whereas now it's like, well, so there certainly was in Europe, but this is even a note I added to before he went to the 56 American paperback version. So in 56 was the first time the full book was released in America, and he had to make some changes. And he said he was so surprised by the extraordinarily positive comments and the extraordinary criticisms that came from America. And I was like, I put it as that this was his first dose of the hyper partisanship politics in America. And he was like, wow, information travels fast. It's harsh criticisms. And what he didn't like about it though was the conservatives were the ones who liked it. They championed it. And he's like, I swear half these people didn't read the book. They just know free markets. Yeah. We're going to push it as much as we can. The left on the opposite side, the people who were liberals,
also didn't read the book.
Yeah. We didn't read the book. The Road to Reactions, one, book I kind of want to read after this. It's full 200 pages. So I don't know. I mean, I've read How to Be an Anti-Racist. So sure I can struggle through that.
Just find the cliff notes, man. Read the Wikipedia on it.
Yeah, right. But he just saw this hyperpartisanship, and he's like, I don't like, some of the criticisms are valid. Like he's someone who's like, I'm going to take a valid criticism, but he was just so surprised by that hyperpartisanship. And I do think just right now, if we wanted to stop and explain these two definitions that keep appearing throughout the book, because planning and liberalism, they're very different. Well, planning is something that we just don't hear a lot about now. And he said in the book, planning, which is like kind of, it's not the precursor to socialism, but the word they use to soften up socialism, right? The word they use to soften up socialism now is democratic socialism, as if it changes anything. Where planning is just the buzzword they used back then, which is just to plan your life, to plan, they claim it's to plan the economic sphere, but you have the rest of your life to yourself, where it's going to take care of your food, shelter, and clothing, right? So those bare essentials that you don't have to worry about, we'll take care of that stuff. But they didn't understand that those spheres do not coexist independently. They are completely together. And if you control the economic sphere, you will inevitably control everyone else's life, because that economic sphere, that your ability to get a job, your ability to move up and down in your job, that provides a lot of meaning to people. And just depriving them of that choice, which also provides meaning to everyone else, is going to, create a populace that is just not ready for responsibility and risks of freedom. And then you have liberalism, which is, I can just read it through here. He said, I use throughout the term liberal in the original 19th century sense, in which it is still current in Britain. In current America, the usage is often means nearly the opposite of this. It has been part of the camouflage of leftist movements in this country, helped by the muddle-headedness of many who believe in liberty, that liberal has come to mean advocacy for almost every kind of government control. That is totally true today, right? That's the origins of the word libtard, which I absolutely hate. It's a horrible, it's nails on a chalkboard to me when people use that word, because they're abusing it, right? That's not, there's nothing liberal about the people you're calling who are advocating for socialism. And so he goes on to say, I'm puzzled why those in the United States who truly believe in liberty should not only have allowed the left to appropriate this almost indispensable term, but should have assisted by beginning to use it themselves as a term of opprobrium. This seems to be particularly regrettable because of the consequent tendency of many true liberals to describe themselves as conservative. So he hated the fact that people like me, who are probably more on the liberal spectrum as he would define it, have to define ourselves as conservatives, because conservatism means different things in Europe and the United States, really to conserve founding principles. So to me, I would say conservatism is an accurate way to describe liberalism in America, because that was part of its founding, and you want to conserve the founding. So, I have a little disagreement with them there. But when we use the words planning, when we use the words liberalism, you have to use those definitions to understand what Hayek is talking about.
Yep. No, that's really good. So I was like, okay, there's a couple analogs that I think are good for our contemporary context for planning. And I just went to Bernie Sanders' Twitter. So a few of the words that I think you can tell me what to think: take bold action, lead, do something, take action, invest. We're going to invest in doing this. Human right. Anyway.
But aren't those all the opposite of inaction, though? And we've talked about this in the previous chapter. People just don't like inaction.
Yeah,
it's a bad thing, right?
That's what we talked about the other night. Can we get into that thing, even though it's not directly about this, but it's what Hayek, I think, is identifying.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that Hayek identifies is the ways in which what had started going on with the system, and actually this does directly relate. It's because it's whenever you start bringing in these experts to guide and plan everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's how this happens, right? So Hayek notices, and I mean, this is one of the things you touched on earlier, but where he's like, okay, we've already had these arguments in Austria. Why are we having them again here? And then he's in the 50s. He's like, why are people still having this argument? And then in the 70s, he's like, why are people still having this argument? Like, This has been settled. Like this doesn't work.
So imagine every single time you went to outer space, you had to have a 3-year discussion on whether or not the Earth is round or flat.
Yeah.
That is that. It's like, well, we're past this. Like,
Yeah.
let's go to the next step.
As much as I don't like settled science, like at some point it's like,
well, there are assumptions. There's always assumptions that have to be made, and some of these assumptions are much more. I mean, and you test assumptions by throwing them into the equation and seeing if the equation ends up with an appropriate outcome, with an outcome that is reasonable to predict. So there are
that's what Nassim Taleb calls the Ludic fallacy, which is you can come up with all these models and equations and formulas in a lab somewhere, but if they don't line up with reality, then you have to reevaluate your equations and your models. You know, like one example is we don't need like a double blind, you know, empirical, like peer reviewed, you know, scientific method, whatever thing, you know, multiple iterations of a process to determine what happens if you throw a cow off a skyscraper, right? Like, it's like, okay, the cow's going to go splat, the end. And, you know, even if someone said, no, I did this, I have these models, I did this, this theoretical iteration, I use these equations, and I think the cow, if it'll probably land this way on its hoof, and the hoof has enough elasticity or something, and it's actually going to bounce, and it will land on top of this other building, and then it will like start spinning and like a dance move. It'll be great. I have the models, I have the paperwork. You'd be like, I don't care what that paper says. There's nothing in that paper outside of you saying you're going to attach that cow to a harness. It's going to convince me that that's even possible. Like,
but it's funny, like you bring up the eye test that we don't do. It's kind of like if you come with me with a study that says this woman can lift the same amount as this man in a dress, you know, that's going to prove that there is no biological differences between the two. And it's like, guess what? Doesn't pass the eye test. And sometimes the eye test is really important because we have to all perceive this thing in reality. And if we can't, then no one's going to believe your BS study, or they're going to be faking ignorance to make sure that they're woke enough.
Exactly. And so the point is that Hayek observed this phenomena like continually of like, why are we keep having this stuff? And again, he gets into the issue of bringing in experts, and experts are single-minded. All they're going to do is these basically univariate analysis. Who is the guy who wrote economics in one lesson?
Henry Hazlitt.
Yeah, Hazlitt. And so like Hazlitt's like, you can't just look at the thing that you're trying to impact. You have you got to look at everything else around it too. And so I think one of the things that Hayek was noticing and gets into, again, he understood it with the experts. He understood that if you bring in experts, they're only going to focus on the subject of their expertise. And when we gave the example of, he gets into like economics specifically, it's like, just let us take care of the economy and it's going to touch everything. And we could, you know, do the COVID thing where it's like, no, just take care of the virology, or let us just take care of the virus. And it's like, okay, it turns out that you can make that impact everything. There's no limiting principles here. But I told you the other night on the phone about how that like Curtis Yarvin dude, Mencius Moldbug. I'm just now catching up on this guy's actual existence, basically, but and how his theory, and I think it's a good one, is that whenever people started bringing in like how rats want prestige, but they don't want, or they want status, but they don't want responsibility. And so bureaucracies will always leak power because they will want to find a way to not be held accountable if things go wrong. And they're just going to want to delegate out. And so they start bringing in these experts like, oh yeah, Mr. Rockefeller is here and he'll take care of it. And they have a paperwork, you know, already ready to go, or Mr. Ford is here or whatever. And they start to like delegate, but basically they outsource the government to these like policymaking entities. And, you know, we have, in all fairness, we had complicated stuff happening. Think about just the first 20, 30 years of the century, of the 20th century. You know, you have a world war for the first time. You're starting to see things like automobiles and airplanes, and you have a stock market crash, you know, and you're starting to see fascism. Like what?
I was going to say, you start to see, like, World War I's a great example of this, because it's the first time that a massive war happened with modern weapons. And that's why it's the bloodiest war, I believe, of all time, is because you're used to sitting there with the cavalry and the bayonets and I'm ready to charge across the field, while the other people have a machine gun that mows you down. Imagine seeing that for the first time.
There was cavalry. There was cavalry in World War I.
Cavalry in World War II. The Soviets were using cavalry in World War II, and the Germans had to, after they're getting their ass kicked after a while. But
not as like their go-to, not as the go-to like World War I.
Yeah, but I mean, imagine just walking into that, like walking into a situation in which, like, you're out there, you're outside in the building with in your cop car with your buddy, figuring out what's happening in the building, and all of a sudden Arnold Schwarzenegger comes out with a minigun and starts mowing you down. I mean, that's stuff you've never seen before, and it would scare all of us.
And so the point is that there was really complicated things happening, and so there was a temptation to bring in the experts. And you bring in the experts, and it's like, here, you decide. And at first the experts are innocent because power is not a thing that they've conceptualized of themselves. But then eventually the more the iterations, the more that's an iterative game, that the more you do it, the more those entities begin to conceptualize themselves as something with power. And by just default, it's just a subconscious thing. And like I did a paint job like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I don't even know time. And no one else there had painted, and there are people who are much older than me, you know, and I was just telling them what to do, and one of them started saying, if I was like, hey, so and so, they'd be like, yes sir. And then another one started doing it, and they were just doing it. And all of them, like, I was aware of it, because I'm like, this is really weird that you're saying yes sir to me, like you're twice my age. But like, it's a thing that just happens like naturally. Like, I could see how, like, and it did become easier to be like, hey, I need you to go and you got paint all over this wall over here. I need you to clean that up, please. And so it just happens. But the point is that once that dynamic is introduced, you know, what Yarvin says is, whenever you tell science you handle it, you will give you the power. He says that's like, you know, telling, why doesn't Gandalf just put on the ring? And the problem is that when Gandalf puts on the ring, he turns into Saruman, and power becomes the thing that services like that entity. And so all ideas that are filtered through them after that it's selects for things that, like, ideas, like you basically create an evolutionary process that selects for the acquisition and enforcement of power. And like, and it doesn't select for things that are like, we're not going to do anything here. And I think that Hayek hadn't seen that game iterate out enough times to realize what had really fully happened, because it was just kind of starting. I mean, I was around that time. I think I told you about that book, The Management Myth. It's a really good book about, and it gets into the origins of scientific management. And that's where we get like management schools, like business management. And it was people who thought that they could use science to more efficiently run like all this random stuff. And it was just crazy. I mean, if you get it, the book is nuts about what a con artist this one guy was, who never had, like, this is like the big origins of just nothing but bad ideas for your entire life, and just get paid like crazy, just having nothing but bad ideas. I actually thought about it whenever I told you I was listening to Thomas Sowell's The Housing Boom and Bust, and he's mentioning people like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Maxine Waters and all these people who like blocked any type of regulation of Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, and who advocated for all these catastrophic policies. And then as soon as things go tits up, they're like, why weren't there was these Republicans were keeping us from regulating stuff. And it's like, here's you saying not to do that like 2 years ago, you know, and it's like, these are the people, you know, as Taibbi says, who they can make an entire career out of being wrong as long as they're wrong in the approved ways. And in this case, the approved ways are ideas that select for power. They're ideas that select for power. And yeah, so I don't know, something you said something that got me on thinking about that, about how it's all just about, you know, you were talking about doing nothing. Like everyone's just wants someone to do something. We don't like inaction. And the reason we don't like inaction is because we've been conditioned to think that inaction means like there, I think that there are times that this is that, oh man, I don't remember the name of the fallacy, but domain dependence, where it's like, there are times we know that inaction is the right thing, right? Like we can observe this all the time with like, if we get a wound or something like that, you know, it's just like, just let it heal, you know. So, you know, you might get and sometimes you need to go to the hospital, but sometimes like inaction is the right thing to do.
Right.
You know, okay, I got poison ivy and it itches and I really want to scratch it. It's like, no, I don't need to scratch it. Like, it's not, inaction is the right thing to do. And Yarvin's point was that the problem with a system that only selects for doing something, like you said, everyone says you got to do something, is that you'll get all these situations where that might be the right answer, but you won't know because it will only ever give you option A. And so it's incapable of telling you what to do. And so I think that if Hayek were around, you know, longer, or maybe just, I think that since he started this process out looking at it when it came to the state and bureaucratic stuff, and I just don't think he had a keen sense for this in academia. And so I think because if he did, because I mean, he probably did the thing, you know. Sorry, I'm just, this last thing I'll say is, like, you can get someone like my dad who thinks that the Democratic Party today is the same as it was in like 1992, you know, and so, and it's just completely wrong. But I think Hayek probably had, like, I don't think he had an idealized vision of academia. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying I think that he probably had a vision of academia that its pathologies were frozen in time in his mind. Like he did, I don't think he saw how bad they were and the implications of how bad they were. Because I think if he did, he probably would have started to focus less and less on the bureaucrats. And I think he would have been like, okay, but who are the policymakers who are like, who's creating the bureaucrats? What's the bureaucrat machine? Like, not the machine that bureaucrats operate, but the machine that creates bureaucrats. Like, I think he would have went back and focused more on academia otherwise.
I mean, do you think it's kind of like, I forgot who founding father said that
Sylvester Stallone.
Yes. He said, Adrian. No, it was this country is built for a moral and religious people.
It is Adams.
Adams, yeah. I think that was like an
Adams
assumption.
or Jefferson is one of the two. Adams or Jefferson.
But right there in that statement, it was an assumption that we would maintain, I think, tradition, that we'd maintain, I would say, more Christianity, to be more overt about it. And I think they're like, in whomever Adams or Jefferson's head, you know, was like, well, why would you turn away from this thing that gave you all this prosperity, that made this possible? Why would you turn away from it? And I think it was maybe,
it was John Adams.
Maybe it was naivete or something that led them to think that we would maintain this kind of core foundation. And if they were around today, they would probably say, oh, wow, we were wrong. They weren't going to maintain this moral and religious people part of it to kind of uphold their end of the bargain. So I think, to me, that was kind of like Hayek being like, academia, yes, I see all the problems with the young ideologues. They're always going to want to try like the new thing, even though it's been tried 100 times. But they're still going to have that core principle of, we need to prepare people for the real world. There's a reality out there. And if we do not start pumping out people who are ready to take the prosperity that we have today and start moving it forward, you know, the university would crumble and fall into nothing. And I think maybe it was that idealism that led him to thinking like, okay, I don't think all universities are going to go the way of, I mean, the way that they are now, effectively, that they don't prepare people for the real world. They're more terraforming reality to make people think that there's certain things and assumptions that are correct that are just not correct, right? The assumption of the great philosopher LeBron James of if you're a person of color and step out your front door, you're being targeted. He hasn't read his works. You're being targeted by the police. Like that is something that you have to terraform reality in order for you to understand, because we have data that would support that evidence if it were part of actual objective reality, but it's not. So what they do is they kind of terraform reality. They make people believe that this is the reality they're walking into. When you walk out that front door, a police officer's got a gun on you immediately at all times, waiting for you to slip up. That is something that I think the university is teaching in a lot of different ways that has completely corrupted the institution, right? We talked a couple of days ago, it's got released, that Ember conversation. If you guys don't know, Truman and I are part of an Ember roundtable with James Darien of Computation Constructs and
Dr. Carlin Bursinko.
Yeah, Dr. Carlin Bursinko. Yeah, I forgot for some reason. But we had a conversation about the load-bearing structures of society, and the two we talked about there is comedy and sports. Yep. Which are, I mean, listen to the conversation. I think a lot of you who are probably listening to this now is like, comedy and sport, why are those load-bearing structures? They are, believe me. Listen to our conversation if you want to learn more. But the one that we didn't get to is education. Yep. And we can't let education fall. Now, this doesn't mean you have to support the educational institutions that are there. Sometimes you need to build sandbags and hunker down and save the institution. Sometimes you got to build an ark and float away and find a new fertile ground to rebuild that institution. But either way, it needs to be there.
Yep.
We can't just abandon any form of education. Now you can take that regular, public school education into homeschooling, and that's going to probably be a lot better for literally everyone. But you can't just let the institution fall. And, I think Hayek might have been thinking, it's like, yeah, there's some crazy wackos in this upper education space, higher education space, but why would they just let the institution fall? Like, they know it's a load-bearing they know it's a load-bearing structure of society. Why would they let it fall? And they were completely willing to do so, even more so now. Again, it's another one of those things we always ask ourselves every single episode, like, what would Hayek think today if you're around today? Yep. How would he change some of his modes of thinking here? And there are a couple areas that I think we spotted that he had changed for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean, dude, even someone like Jordan Peterson in that Yeonmi Park interview, one of the things that had him crying at the end was he was like, I think his exact words were, "It's not easy for me to see what's happened to the higher educations and to the universities and academia." He said, "It's not easy for me." Because he loves and cares about the university. So even someone like JP, within the last few years, is like, I can't believe how bad it's gotten. So, I mean, go back 70 years, of course you're going to get, it's going to be like that. What's been one of the things for you that has so far, like whenever you think about this book, like so far, what's been like the things you're like, son of a bitch, man, how did he know? How did he call this? Like, how is this flown on the radar like this? Like, is there any like specific quote or idea or chapter or anything like that? You're just like, this is so brilliant. Why is no one talking about this? Like, this is so prescient. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, what's it been like for you? Like, even just going back through this.
So we've talked about this before. If you want to get my answer on that, read Orwell's 1984. Read Animal Farm. Orwell said that Hayek was an inspiration to him when writing his books, and he put some of his ideas into action. And it is a few key words that are out there that have been redefined in his time that we still see redefined today, and the ball just keeps moving on him to make sure that the advocates of planning, or what we call the advocates of socialism or collectivism, whatever you want to call it, really what we see in the movement of the modern day left, although again, it's certainly on all sides or in all parties, but just the changing over these words. So one that we see today all the time, and I found the quote here, is beware of the promise of equality, right? We hear equality all the time. It is, to quote here, democracy and socialism have nothing in common but one word, equality. But notice the difference. While democracy seeks equality and liberty, socialism seeks equality in restraint and servitude. This is them saying, we want you to be equal, but because of all these, the bad white man holding you back or the bad oppressor holding you down, we need to make sure to plan their lives as well to make sure that they won't allow you to hold you down. And by that, they're taking away choices from people who are against you at the time, but eventually they're going to turn their power on you and say, all right, we need to control your actions because obviously we don't want you oppressing someone else, because we will come up with another oppressor class to make sure. I mean, that's why you see these oppression Olympics that start, at the top level of, sometimes it's gender first, women are oppressed by men, and then black people are oppressed by white people, and then fat people are oppressed by skinny people, and then disabled people. It just keeps going. They're going to keep going down that oppressor class to make sure that they can control your life now, to make sure that everyone's equal for you. Another redefinition word is freedom.
Yep.
I have here another quote. The new freedom promise was to be free from necessity, released from the compulsion of circumstances which inevitably limit the range of choice of all of us, although some very much more than others. The demand for the new freedom was thus only another name for the old demand of an equal distribution of wealth. Yep. That a million times before, right? But the new name gave the socialists another word in common with the liberals, and they exploited it to the full, right? Because they want to bridge these really, really good words like liberal, like freedom. They're going to appropriate those to make sure that people who understand those are good words, they're going to reappropriate them for their own personal gain, because they know who's going to fight against liberalism. If they did it to racism, who's going to say, I hate people who are against racism? But now that's like something you have to say, I don't like people who advocate for anti-racist policies. And they're like, oh, so you want to be racist? Like, no, it's just their redefinition changes everything about it. So you can then hear, and although the word was used in a different sense by the two groups, few people noticed this, and still fewer asked themselves whether the two kinds of freedom promised could really be combined. So one thing that I actually really liked about there is he talks about, it's not a new demand. This is not new freedom. It's just a very old demand. It's a very, these self-described progressives are not trying to progress. They're actually regressing. They say they're trying to progress past the postmodern, right? They want to be postmodern. They want to be post-Christian. They want to be post-capitalist. Yep. But in reality, they're actually advocating for pre-modern, pre-Christian, pre-capitalist societies, pre-liberal societies. They're actually trying to go backwards. They're not progressive. They're regressive. And by them appropriating these terms, I mean, these are two of them right here. You have equality, you have freedom. He's got privilege in there, which privilege is like the actual definition of privilege is someone getting an unfair leg up via an actual open rule, right? And so you talk about privilege in Jim Crow South, white people had a privilege because it was written there in the law. They actually had something over someone else, where privilege is redefined today as if you happen to have parents who, did really well in their career, now you're privileged because you end up at a higher starting point than someone else. That's not actually real privilege if you're under the same rules as everyone else. But there are countless examples of redefining words that we see here in 1944, and now we're rediscovering again, in the 2020s, and being like, oh, why would they do this? Well, they did it a while ago. Hayek warned us of it, and it should not be surprising anymore.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to recap, is it the language stuff then?
Yeah. I would say, I'd quite literally say all the stuff that surprised us in these Orwell novels is the stuff that kind of comes from him. It's the stuff that he built out the logic centers of. I liked Hayek. I liked him immediately because you were the one who read the book originally. You recommended it to me. I read it, and the first thing I thought is, my favorite author of all time, right up behind me, Thomas Sowell. I think he's terrific, but it's because I'm an analytical person. I like to see the data laid out for me. I like to research the data. It's just fun for me. He would hit people over the head with data and information, but Hayek was like the logic center of his brain. He talked a lot about Hayek. He referenced him a lot. So I said before I ever read this book, I feel like I've read a lot of it through references in other books. But this logic center that Hayek was able to work, inside of Sowell, inside of other writers, made me understand him. And now reading this book, I'm really, thoroughly, it helps me understand Orwell's novels better, right? Because now I kind of see the historical baseline as to why he wrote the way he did, why he saw what he did, because Orwell was effectively an investigative journalist.
Yep.
And I wish some investigative journalists today would actually, take note, maybe.
Or exist.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd take that, I guess, but sure. But that's what I find so incredible. That was like the first really big thing to me. I mean, there's like a huge truth bomb hitting you in the head after reading every chapter in this book, and that's the most fun part. The only thing that sucked about reading this book is I had tried to read it in a week, and I was like, I wanted to stop so many times and think through his thoughts and being like, how did he get here?
Yep.
And a lot of it was stopping. I'm listening to the audiobook as I'm walking my dogs, which, by the way, audiobook, if you have an Audible account, is for free for the Road to Serfdom.
Yep.
But
and a lot of Souls books, actually.
A lot of I'm surprised to get them while they're there because I can't imagine they would be there for that long. But man, so many times I had to stop and be like, how 1944, how did you do that? Did he have Google? I don't know. I don't understand how he was able to see this stuff before everyone else did. And to me, that's just incredible. How observant he was. And I think that's what we need more now, more observant people, observant in reality, not their own version of reality.
Yeah. James Burnham's The Machiavellians was released in 43. He wrote that in 43, so a year before Road to Serfdom's official book release. He gets a lot into the switcheroo of language. I think for me, there's a few things. One, I just think I like lenses for viewing situations. Think about like Thomas Sowell, like as opposed to what are his three questions as opposed to what, according to who, or what are the ones he asks? I forgot all three of them. I know.
I don't remember totally.
Okay.
To dive back into Soul. Sorry, I've read Kendi, Michelle Alexander, and the other guy.
New Jim Crow.
Yeah, no, the other dude that faces at the bottom of the well. That guy. So I've read him between.
Derek Bell.
Derek Bell. Between the last time I wrote Soul, so I've had several dead brain cells along the way. So
sure,
my recollection of Soul is going to hopefully come back to me next time.
Soul gives you he gives good lenses, like as opposed to what? I mean, that's what Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, right? That's a lens for viewing things. And I think Hayek
establishing a baseline,
yeah. And so I think Hayek has like some really good lenses and paradigms for situations. Like the consensus versus coercion one is huge for me. I think just the interconnected nature of things, like just let us control the economy, and then seeing how all of those are connected has been big for me. I think the natural progression of some of these ideas and that why the worst get on top, I think is really good. Just like Yarvin talks about, like, here's the progression of the system. Once it happens like this, it will only ever operate like this. It will only ever do this. It will only ever select these kinds of ideas. And I think this, what Hayek lays out here is similar, where this will only ever do this. It will only ever produce this thing. Like this ideology, this collectivist ideology will only ever produce this thing. And I really appreciate that.
The question I was asking myself a lot is not only why would they produce this thing, but the question to me that really hit me across the head is like, why wouldn't it produce?
That's good.
Like why would you think there's any other logical conclusion to what's happening?
Perfectibility of man. That's why. The people who advocate for this stuff, they believe in the perfectibility of mankind. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And so I think that, that's a whole other topic, but like the point is that I think that has been a big one for me. Also just some of those, I think quotes are really important sometimes. And like whenever he's quoting people at the beginning, I think it's in chapter 5 on democracy and planning. I think that's 5. When they're talking about how, we'll have to see, what happens if we're in the middle of implementing socialism and people vote us out. Like, would we allow that to happen, and how they don't answer the question. and how if
It's
a legitimate election takes place and the people don't like their ideas and they're like, yeah, how much do we really need to listen to them? So I think just the way some of these, there was, I mean, this is what Soul says in that book on the housing boom and bust, is he says, once you open the floodgates, you can't control where the water is going to go. It's just going to do what it's going to do. And these people like open the floodgates on power, on this massive centralized power. And they think they can control and direct what happens after that. And they just can't. It's just so naive. And that's the thing that the last thing I'll say is just that naivete and the hubris. You mentioned Keynes earlier. There's a quote. I went back. I don't remember what brought me there. Like maybe like a week ago, I was listening to a chapter in Soul's Knowledge and Decisions. And he literally opens it up with a quote from Keynes, where Keynes is like, we were convinced by nothing other than the rightness of our ideas. We ignored everything. And it's just some statement like that. I'll have to find it. But I'm like, that is one of the most arrogant, idiotic statements I ever heard. It was like, we were just going to go because we thought we were right, and evidence be damned.
moral basis versus moral results.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think just those lenses of like, you just have to ask these questions and think about the progression, think about the logical conclusion. What's the logical conclusion whenever you do this? And he just understood so well the logical conclusion of these pathologically like stupid ideas that completely ignore the past and the road that brought us to all this prosperity. He understood that about, or he understood, one, what brought us here, and then two, how dangerous it was. Sorry, I'm really tired. I think I told you I stayed up all night painting, and then I took a nap inside of a closet and for a couple hours, and then got up. And
so for those of you listening to this, Truman had to come out of the closet to get on this live stream
again today. Again,
appreciate it. Right?
Yeah. Wasn't I recording something in a closet? One of our episodes, our Road to Serfdoms, like maybe 3 weeks ago. I was in that closet of my in-laws. I think so. Anyway,
wherever we can find inspiration for highbrow intellectual discussions, I think
that's right.
We'll take it. Bathroom, closet.
I hear the gays are very enlightened and culturally advanced. So I'm trying to inhabit that space without inhabiting that space. But yeah, those are some of the things for me.
Yeah. I mean, to tease out this, because he talked about this in chapter 10, why the worst get on top, the moral basis versus the moral results. And I could read a quick quote here. The moral basis of collectivism has much been debated in the past, but what concerns us here is not its moral basis, but its moral results, meaning effectively your intentions are irrelevant. The interaction between morals and institutions may well have the effect that the ethics produced by collectivism will be altogether different from the moral ideas that lead to the demand for collectivism. So they have this demand for collectivism, right? We see poor people here. We're in a really prosperous, rich society. Why is there poor people still in America today? This is this moral basis. It should be immoral to allow people to sleep on the streets, to not be able to feed their kids. This is immoral. This is immoral.
Yeah.
Redistributive policy.
Yeah.
Right. The war on poverty, all of these different things, these different policies, the collectivist policies, right? The moral basis for collectivist policies end up producing more poverty, more dependence on government. It didn't lift these ships that were sinking toward the bottom of the ocean. It just sunk all the other ships down.
Yeah.
Is that a moral result? It's not a moral result. You created more poverty. You created more reliance. People are no longer in control of their lives. They have less choice. They have no ability to get themselves out of this hole they find themselves in. But we still claim, well, it was moral for me to start the war. It's moral for me to get in the fight. It's not my fault that everyone got shot in the face when I jumped in there. Right? It is this complete misunderstanding. And now there's another part that ends that last chapter. And I know it's chapters in my head because the last one we reviewed together, but the worst get on top when the ends justify the means becomes the supreme rule. So what it says here is, quote, the principle that the ends justify the means in the individualist ethics is regarded as the denial of all morals, right? Normal people, what we consider normal people who actually have a moral compass, see the ends justify the means is sometimes a condition you have to step into to stop other bad things from happening. But it's against our moral code. It's against all of our morals. But in collectivist ethics, to quote again, in collectivist ethics, it becomes necessarily the supreme rule. When the ends justifies the means, when you have to step up for people who are in poverty by saying we need to take all the rich people and take all their money, and even though those rich people are going to go somewhere else, because why would they stay in a system where they're no longer allowed choice, no longer allowed to do the things that provided the wealth and prosperity for their families? When they're all gone, now everyone's poor, everyone's destitute. The ends did not justify the means. It was immoral. The means were immoral. The ends are immoral, and now you're sitting here in a totalitarian regime. You're finding yourself as Germany, where you're starting to kill your own people because you're finding some other group to blame, right? The Jews in Germany back in the 20th century were the face of capitalism, so they had to take them out because overwhelming support to get the Jews out of society because they were made this evil character, and they believe the ends justify the means, right? So they did it. Most people agree to do it except for the victims. And this is how you get a society that will end up doing horrible things, even though you believe your society is not capable of those things. You'd be surprised by how capable they are once they see the road they have to go down in order to get to their goal.
Do you think it's possible to dismantle the bureaucratic state that we live in right now?
It's hard without blowing it up. Is blowing it up an option?
Is that what he said? Blow it up. Let's blow it up. That's an Aqua Teen Hunger Force quote.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but it's hard to say yes without that being an option, right?
That's like that Lenin quote. That's that Lenin quote. The goal wasn't to take over the system. The goal was to demolish it.
Yeah. It's hard you have to get people who are willing to give up their own power, and that seems almost impossible, right? They talk about the worst getting on top. It's very rare that people who are willing to give up their own power, those George Washingtons are rare, that decide, like, I will not be king because this is not what the founding principle of this country was based on. Not only would you need one George Washington, you need multiple in order to reverse the trend we're on now. But to do it in a way that's not going to end up being a French Revolution, that's the hard part, because a lot of the heads can get chopped off, a lot of bodies can be hung
off of this head.
And the end, a great quote from another YouTuber. But a great quote is, he talks about the revolution is 360 degrees. You often end up where you started. So revolution is not always something that you want to jump into. But there is a point at which things get too far that you can't, it's hard to do anything but completely overturn everything. But I think that you have to start out with people reading stuff like this, people believing that freedom is a risk and responsibility that they should undertake, that the default condition is not, there's a great, it's chapter 9, security and freedom, where he talks about, you can't trade in your freedom for government sponsored security, kind of like the Benjamin quote. We have to teach that into people now. Like we talked about with our Benjamin Boyce conversation, where we used to be a screw you daddy nation. That was ingrained in us to say the government, screw you. You want to take my guns, screw you. Now you have half of the country clamoring to say, please take their guns. I feel unsafe unless you have all the guns. It's this horrible culture change that we went through that I think, Hayek saw it in Britain. Hayek saw it in Britain. There's a really good quote about, when he saw Britain end their reign as the kind of ideological leader in the world, the Western world, when they started importing ideas instead of exporting them. And I think we're at that tipping point in America where we're beginning to export ideas instead of import them, or we're beginning to import them instead of export them. We want to be an exporter of culture. We want our ideas of freedom and liberty to go out to every other nation out there. But once we start importing ideas, and saying, you know what, America's bad. You know, the Tom McDonald quote, or Tom McDonald rap lyric, I guess, is, you know, there's no people who hate America more than Americans. You know,
Yep.
we're starting to see a complete rejection of the ideas that got us here, the founding principles that got us here. And that is what's leading to a quick end. And I think reversing that trend is the first step to making sure we can maintain our constitutional republic.
What's interesting is if the year was 2006 or 2004 or something like that, I would have said there's probably a lot of Europeans that hate Americans more than Americans hate Americans. I think right now people probably just feel bad for us. Like it went from like dumb American to those dumb Americans. Like I don't see how anyone could hate something like this. It's like this like slow motion, like train wreck, garbage nonsense, you know, that we're seeing right now, where it's just like, you can't hate it. I can hate it. I can hate it. But outsiders got to be like,
if America was worth hating, one, there wouldn't be people trying to cross the border constantly. The biggest border crisis we've had in a while, if not ever. The horrifying,
in like 20 biggest numbers in like 24 years or something like that.
But like the horrifying, you know, video that just came out, you know, as we're recording this is kind of the aftermath of us pulling out of Afghanistan, and the horrifying video and pictures of
the airport,
Afghanis trying to grab onto an airplane that's taken off, and then the photos of the airplane in the air as people are hanging out inside of it falling off. You know, it really reminded me of people falling out of the Twin Towers. Like horrifying graphics, and that's not what happens when America is not a beacon of hope. And, you know, according to the mainstream media here, everyone in the Middle East hates us because we're over there just trying to grab their oil, right? We're not.
I will steel man the other side and say that even if that plane was going to Nepal, they would be trying to get on that plane because they just didn't want to be around the Taliban. Like that's just a way out.
But I mean, just showed us, showed us the importance of us as being there. Our presence there was keeping the bad guys away. And, you know I made a post yesterday about like, I get it. This is something started by Trump, but that's certainly a message carried by Trump that like, why are we in foreign wars? I get that. But another important principle put forth by Thomas Sowell is there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And the trade-off that we did for freedom, you know, we should be over there nation building. I don't really want to put our men and women, our heroes, in harm's way. But what happens when we completely pull out is you see all this devastation with the families and everything that are left there, that are recognized as traitors because they actually supported the American military there, the oppression that's going to go on over there. And also, you know, I claimed that I think, you know, a 9/11 style attack seems to be probably inevitable on American soil, probably in the next decade, because why would, I mean, this was kind of their plan the whole time. It's like, we can just wait you out, and then next time you leave, we'll just, you know, plan another attack. It's just their method, unfortunately.
Yeah, except for this time, they'll blame it on Trump supporters or something. Shit, I had a question based on what you just said. I can't remember. What it was. It's a bummer, man, because it was a good question. It was like the best question.
Well, I'll stall.
I remember what it was. Okay, there's this like documentary, not documentary, it's like a fictional kind of what if thing that I watched a long time ago called A World Without Us, but it was like US. It was like what would happen if the United States like completely pulled all of our troops and all of our bases, closed everything down around the world. And like they basically posited that like within a week North Korea would invade South Korea. You know, and all of these other things. And they were like you said, I don't agree. To me, that's just a global representation of the issue that we have, like with something like Social Security. Like if you just rip the Band-Aid off, it's going to really be painful for a good hot minute. And you know, it might take a little while to course correct into something, you know. But on the other side of that, that was at the end of Sol's book on the housing boom and bust. He talked about the comparisons with the New Deal, which were hilarious. Because again, we hear this today. I swear to God, the left just has like, it's just like we're singing the same song, right? Which verse are we on? Same song. But about how there was Reagan faced a lot of criticisms for like not doing stuff during this economic downturn at the beginning of the 80s. And
When the crash of 87.
I don't know if that was when he's talking. It might have been that. I thought they mentioned something like, remember how in the late 70s or something we had like the stagflation from the Saudi oil crisis.
I know that. Yeah, I think he definitely did, but it happened twice. So 87, right. There was a crash that was just as bad as the economic crash in the early 20th century, but he did nothing and we recovered immediately, which is like against the Green New or the New Deal, or not even the New Deal. I mean, just our response to that original crash was 1919. Was it?
Yeah. The crash. No, it was in Black Tuesday. It was 29.
Yeah, 29. That's what I meant. But we responded to that, and we probably extended it for about 10 years in our response.
7 is the estimate, but yeah,
7 to 10, maybe 4.
One example. Sol said that unemployment peaked at 9% after the crash, and then was down at 6% when Truman took off. Not Truman, Roosevelt, FDR took office. It was at 6%, and that dipshit passed Smoot-Hawley tariffs. And it skyrocketed up to double digits, and it never left double digits for the rest of the decade.
The book actually Sol quotes
had double digit.
There's a book called Out of Work. I have it up there, and that's the book that he quotes for that data.
So it's called Out of Work.
Out of Work.
Who wrote it?
Richard K. Vedder and Lowell E. Galwell. So I don't know.
Okay.
It's when this is the one he cited. And I know people were like attacking him for citing false statistics, or their claim is, unemployment lags. So that's what they said was the problem, is it was lagging unemployment that made it seem like it was so bad.
It seems weird that it would go up.
Employment doesn't lag for 4 years though.
Yeah. Anyway,
I don't know. I'm not a geologist, but I'm just guessing.
That's right. I'm not a podiatrist. Did you whenever you're watching those Norm Macdonald's, did you watch whenever he tells the moth joke going into the podiatrist?
Probably.
It's like a super duper long joke, and it's just like, what in the hell is this? Is the punchline of this joke?
Oh yeah, I do remember that one.
Yeah, the light was on. So,
for all of you who are watching this live stream, this is what all of our conversations like offline and on the phone devolved to, is like, what jokes did these other people make, or like we'll just go into comedy like immediately. So,
yeah, dude,
is what it is.
I went and watched. Well, actually, this was not funny, but I think I told you it might have been you. That's why I watched like The Big Short the other night. After this line, sons of bitches. But I'm gonna go and I'm gonna download some. I think I'll download the latest episode of Rick and Morty. I'll watch it tomorrow morning. Anyway, that has nothing to do with what the hell was I talking about? Smoot-Hawley, progressive, do nothing. Oh, anyway, okay, so. How like whenever we did nothing, and the comparison, like things skyrocketed back. I don't know what made me think about that, because I know we were talking about something that made me think about that, but I don't know what it was. I don't know. So, okay, here's a question I have for you. And like, I know that doing like this mid-book discussion, we've only kind of talked about the book, which is fine. What was something that I wanted to do, but just like, I don't know, man, it just seemed like there's so much stuff here in this book. Like, can you imagine trying to do a full recap of the book You know what I mean? Like a actual thought by thought, recap of the book. Like it would take so long, man. It would take so long. And it just feels like there's so much here. And it honestly bums me out, Kevin, where it's like there's so much wisdom. There's so much wisdom. I remember, and I know maybe I've told you this before. I know I've mentioned this before in other podcasts I've done, where it's like mistakes are good to learn from, but they don't have to be your mistakes. I think it was also in that soul book where he said bad eras of policy are good eras of learning, or something like that. And so I get, my point is that it's okay for there to be these mistakes in the past, as long as people fucking learn from them.
Mm-hmm.
And like, so many of my friends got married before I did, and so I was able to learn from their mistakes. So they would have these fights and arguments, and I would be like, noted. Now it just means I'll make a whole new
right,
cavalcade of mistakes, but it means I'm not going to make theirs. And it bums me out that we have these mistakes, we have the knowledge, we have the information, and we're just still doing it. It feels like we're having the same conversations because this system is so geared towards doing something and ignore. And part of that is, and I think just a subroutine within that evolutionary process of selecting ideas geared towards action as opposed to inaction, is it also selects out or it whatever the opposite of that is. If it doesn't select for something, if something is recessive or something, I don't know, any link to disconfirmation of its own ideas. So it doesn't carry on. There is a selection process of knowledge that follows with it. So it's not just a selection of information or a selection of paradigms. There's also a selection process of knowledge that starts to select out and leave behind anything that disproves like its other selection process that doesn't feed its other selection process of doing something. And that means that we're just losing information. We're losing paradigms. We're losing these frames and lenses and past examples that are tangible and realistic to learn from. And it really bums me out that it's like that people are just not connected to these examples from the past and these it's the wisdom of the past. I remember this is a long time ago, Ruben interviewed someone, man, this was like maybe 3 years ago, and this answer is always just kind of like, I've always thought it was an interesting answer. And he said it might have been some historian, and he asked him, he said, if you were going to take someone who was alive like 100 years ago, even 100 years ago, 100, 200 years ago, and fast forward them to today. I think Dave was trying to make a point about like just the prosperity of today or something like that.
Yeah.
And he said, like, what do you think what would that like chronological culture shock be like for him? And the person said, well, of course they would have a time where they'd have to adjust all the technology and all that other stuff, right? That would be the biggest thing. And then he said, once that kind of started to sink in and they started to at least, become accustomed somewhat to the existence of technology, the first real tangible thing, in comparison to their time that they would notice and not understand would be the segregation that we have of generations, of how the young are siloed off with the young and the middle age are siphoned off the middle age, and the older people are siphoned off the older people. And so there's just not a big connection between the wisdom of the past and then those who will go on into the future to like lead in the future. And that stuck with me for a long time. And I think that's just kind of, just one other way of articulating that point of that we've lost that link because the system is selecting out like, okay, boomer, or whatever. And I do have my my share of ire for boomers because of, you know, just the ways in which their idiocy is shaped the last 70 years. But, you know, at the same time, um, we can't lose that connection, even if there's things that frustrate us.
That should be a mistake to learn from, right?
Right, exactly. And you get that by being connected to it. No, that's a great point. Yeah, that's a great
I
point.
think, yeah, I think there's a little bit of a bandwidth issue. We just have so much information coming at us that we can only focus on so much at a time. But I also do think that,
and it's where it's coming from. It's coming from the now. It's all about the now. It's all now information.
Well,
it's not past.
This is not my original idea, but what I always try to repeat is the greatest privilege we have today is to judge people of the past by our standards. So we can look at them as evil, racist groups who like should have never been around and they're awful people, and we can never learn anything from George Washington because he held slaves. We can never learn anything from any of the founding fathers because he had slaves.
That's correct.
And that's just an awful attitude. Like you have to learn. You know, every it's like the Jurassic Park quote. It's like you have to stand on the shoulders of geniuses in order to get to where you want to go, to get to that prosperity. If you actually want to invent something other than fire in the wheel, you have to stand on the shoulders of geniuses, but you have to have respect for them
and acknowledge it.
We lost that respect. We lost that acknowledgement. We think we're just better than they are. And I think the bad ideas stick in our heads, I think, from something else, right? We should have natural selection of ideas, if you will, where all the good ideas are selected out because we find ourselves more prosperous at the time. So we keep selecting out all these great ideas, and that's how we keep moving forward. That's how we progress. But these bad ideas stick in our heads like a parasite. You know, it's something
they stick in because there's not a penalty for them. Evolutionaries think about it like that. If that plant is poisonous, you take a bite, you're dead. Right?
Yeah.
A lot of these bad ideas aren't having those consequences. That's what the champagne socialists, right? It's like, yeah, sure, defund the police. I've got my private security. So like they can pass on ideas, you know, think about it like just like traits, like being passed on genetically. So they can pass those things on without paying a penalty for it.
Yeah. Yeah. We have, we just don't seem to have a good mechanism to teach this into the, you know, next generation of people, to teach in what these mistakes were, because we're not even learning from mistakes. I mean, if we learn from our mistakes, from our past mistakes, we would know that it's not that socialism hasn't been tried. It's that we should stop trying and stop killing millions of people in the process. But there's just so many different things that we cannot seem to attach onto or find useful or have reference for the people who've discovered those things. You know, people, I mean, when I talk about discovering things, I'm talking about Solzhenitsyn's, you know, the people who got out alive and said, this is the atrocity that you will experience inevitably if you go down this road.
Pay attention. Flashing red lights, pay attention.
Exactly. Yep. Utopia means unattainable. You can't get there.
Nowhere.
It's Puff the Magic Dragon. You're just gonna keep chasing them. And then you're gonna OD in a bathroom stall somewhere. But I think, you know, we haven't found, we got to go back to finding that mechanism that allows us to learn from past mistakes while still looking at these people as, you know, flawed human beings. The history of humanity is made up of people who put standards that they couldn't hold themselves up to. And we need to stop just condemning them for not holding themselves up to those standards, and actually recognize, you know, what they can teach us rather than just them as a people, and trashing them with hashtags on Twitter is not a super effective way to do it. So I think we need to go back to learning rather than, you know, I always talk to my kids, like when when I tell them something and they don't listen, I'm like, you don't listen with your mouth, you listen with your ears. Sometimes you just got to stop, pay attention, and have reverence for people who might not have been great before you. But, you know, go back.
Yeah. Your mom's a really good listener, and she does actually listen with her mouth.
Fuck you, Shirzy.
Anyway, like really good. So, all right. So what's so that aside, what would you say, like, so far? I mean, I know you said that for you, the switcheroo of language has been like the big takeaway, and the way, and it's kind of one of those things that you see it and you can't unsee it, you know, like a lot of this stuff.
Mhm.
But like, what are you? Well, maybe that is the question. I was trying to think if there's something that you were going to kind of just give people like a one takeaway so far from the book, but that's probably it. What are you looking for?
Can I talk to you about something I think important? I highlighted here, and there's actually a quote that you have here from chapter 5 that I think is something that we need to put focus on. The quote is here.
Yeah, good. I'm falling asleep, so I'm like trying to not like, go on. Yeah, do it. Let's do it.
We can even close out with this one, but I think this is extremely important. And what you wrote here is the decreased probability of agreement leads to the increased necessity of coercion. What do you mean by that?
It means that we're not like, well, that's what Hayek says, is that socialism can only be attained under circumstances which most socialists would vigorously oppose, right? So if you have a plan and you have 100 people in a room and you say, hey, look, me and my 10 friends, or me and my 2 friends or whatever, like, we've got this really good idea. Like, we're the experts. Like, of course, this is a great idea. People are going to listen to this. People are going to want to do this. And then, and we planning, right? We're going to give you some platitudes. We're going to give the formal meaning, as Burnham would say, to something. And then we get power, and then we start to give the specifics. And there is some people, let's say 30%, are like, I don't want to do that. I will never do that. And then you get like another 30% who are like, I won't do that, but I'll do this version of that, and it just goes on and on and on. And the point is that it's very difficult to get consensus. And if this is a thing that you feel like you have to do, this is maybe the thing you said you're going to do that you've committed to doing. You literally now have to choose between failure and force, because you can say, well, we didn't get enough people along, on board with it. Darn it, maybe next time. Or you can say, the reason I'm even in this situation is because I think this is the morally right thing to do. I think this is a virtuous thing to do. We're gonna have a better society if we do this. And so, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. And if there's some degenerates, some deplorables, some, unwashed, whatever, we need a new word for the V word. Yeah, I was trying to come up with another word for that, but if if some unvaccinated dregs, are going to keep us from getting, we're going to break those eggs because we got to get this omelet made. So, and the problem is that it's especially in a diverse society, even in a homogenous society, you're not going to get full consensus, but especially in our society with over 340 million people, you will not get consensus. And if you have to choose between failure and force, and you are completely convinced of the rightness of your idea, you're either going to opt out. You're going to say, okay, I personally will take the L. I will fail. I'm okay failing rather than doing this thing. That's the thing. So socialism can only be achieved by means in which most socialists find abhorrent. But you've already built the thing. You've already built the machine. And so you opting out does not mean that the machine is, someone else will take your role and then they will exert force instead. That's why the worst get on top. But that's the point, is that all of these things, they either think that they'll get consensus on. I mean, you saw this with who was the mayor? It might have been like the mayor of San Francisco or of no, it wasn't San Francisco. It was either Portland or Seattle. Okay, so it wouldn't be Portland because that's a guy. So it was the mayor of Seattle. This woman was in this interview, and she had said that she was going to require all policemen to get vaccinated. And the interviewer is like, but what if they don't? Are you going to fire them? And she's like, well, I think they will. And the woman said, okay, I've had police officers reach out to me, many, who say they won't. Will you fire them? And she wouldn't answer the question. She kept saying, she's like, well, no, I just reject your assumption. I'm just more optimistic than you are. Okay, I think they'll make the right decision. And of course, she's just obfuscating and just kind of, like deflecting. But the point is that she had this idea that she's going to get consensus. She's going to get what she wants. And she kind of like she put a shot across the bow, in a tweet or something about how people would get fired. But then she wouldn't answer the question. And we're seeing that with a lot of the stuff. Again, the same with the masks off, man. This isn't pants off, dance off. This is like mask off, like authoritarian hour. Nothing rhymes with masks off. But anyway, but like masks are off with this stuff. Where it's like you're articles and you're seeing quotes and you're seeing people in the news like Don Lemon and other dipshits who are like, well, hey, look, we tried offering it for free. We tried all these carrots. We tried all this, these treats and incentives, and those didn't work. So you don't want the carrot. We're going to give you the stick and we're going to use coercion. And it's like, that's exactly right. That is exactly how this thing works. Exactly how this thing works. These idiots think that they can impose their will on everyone. And when everyone says no, they'll choose force over failure every time.
Yeah.
Because those are the options presented to them. I don't know if that answers the question, but
it does. Yeah. I think people think, especially so this idea is in a chapter of Planning and Democracy, in which Hayek explains how planning and democracy are really not.
Is it chapter 5? Is it 5?
It's chapter 5, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, Planning and Democracy in chapter 5, where he talks about how there's no possible way a planned economy or a planned society can possibly take in all of the objective ends, goals of all of its people. So it needs to build a social scale of values in order to try to account for all of these things. And that's never going to come at a large agreement. And the more that they have to, publicly show they have to push their ideas on people, the less agreement there's going to be. When all of these states came out with mask mandates, were like, okay, a lot of people don't agree with that. They go with vaccine mandates. Now more people are disagree with that. And the more overbearing that power is, the less people will agree. But when they decrease that power, if they can get this coercive power, then that agreement is absolutely irrelevant, right? This is the trade-off that they want to make. It's like, okay, you don't have to agree with me as long as you give us power and force the people who don't agree with me to agree with me. And it's no longer agreements is no longer a necessity, which agreement is very necessary in a democracy, which is why that's one of the reasons why you see this attempt at dehumanizing people who might dissent, because it will make the use of force and coercion more palatable, palatable to the average person. Yeah. So that's a huge part of this. And he gets into that in the Why the Worst Get on Top chapter, right? Where he's like, you have to have an enemy. Because if you don't vilify, once you realize you're going to have to use force, you have to do something to get the rest of the people who might actually agree with you on board and desensitize them to the force you're going to have to exert. Eric Hoffer.
Yeah, exactly.
Explains that exactly in The True Believer. And it's inevitable. Like there's no other logical solution to this when you start down the trail, when you start down this road, that it's going to go down any other road. You're going down it. So I think that's important to recognize. And I think the chapter after this, chapter 6, which is Planning and the Rule of Law, is also extremely important chapter. We're gonna have to.
It has to be arbitrary, and that's what he gets into about how like the law can't have any understanding. Like blind justice can't exist with this, because they have to be able to force their outcomes. They don't like if they don't know how it's going to play out. And that's really, really telling. That's a huge red flag.
Yeah. A quote here that we've seen many times is, to produce the same result for different people, it is necessary to treat them differently. You have to treat that as arbitrary law. You have to treat them differently. To give different people the same objective opportunities, not to give them the same subjective chance. When we go out there and we see disparities, and someone who wrote a review of Thomas Sowell's book, and he had a really brilliant line in there that we need to stop treating disparities guilty until proven innocent, because that's how we treat them now, right? If we see a disparity, it's a bad thing. Something bad must have happened to get us there. No, it's you will see disparities naturally occurring when you have, if you advocate for multiculturalism, okay, fine, multiculturalism away, but then don't expect equal results in the back end, because culture has such a strong influence, unless you're Ibram Kendi, such a strong influence on what you do and how you act and decisions you make, the choices that you put in front of you in your reality. It's like, I don't, if there's this one choice to work hard, and I'm in a culture that's like, I'd rather have leisure time, which is there's nothing wrong with that. Why would I work hard? Why would I get all this money? Because you get to choose which one you want to go with. You're going to get disparate outcomes. And, we treat those as something that went wrong in the system, because the way that these people and the way we're conditioned to think about it is as the planners. Well, there had to have been a plan here. Therefore, the plan must have failed if people are not getting the same outcomes. It's not, their choices aren't theirs. It must be some sort of centralized plan. And the plan is bad. Give us the power. We can change the plan, equalize outcomes, make everyone's day better. You don't have to worry about anything. And in the end, you end up in line in front of a freaking oven, because it's like I didn't understand what freedom meant. I didn't understand what the risk and responsibility was. And now I'm going to trade this, my freedom for some security from the government, who's eventually going to turn on me because it's just advantageous for them at the time. And you find yourself a victim instead of a beneficiary.
Yeah. And that freedom that you give away for security, that security can't be leveraged for freedom back again. Like it's a one-way currency exchange. Yeah, exactly. Non-refundable. That's exactly right. Yep. That's exactly right. This is it. You bought it as is. Our return policy is you're dead. You will return to the ground from whence you came. All right. So how do you want to bring it home here? Because I'm seeing double vision, not from the one beer I had, but because I'm freaking tired.
It's Heineken for you, man. Man, to kind of distill this down into something disusable is a good summary of 10 chapters is you really have to read it, or listen to us read it, or give our opinions on it to really understand the value of all these chapters. But he does do a great job. I mean, you damn near read through just the titles of these chapters. I know that's bad. Yeah. It's like the headline thing. It's like you read a headline, you think you know everything about the content of the article. But I
saw the story. I mean, I read a tweet.
I know. Said it can grow 3 inches in a day. I don't know. But it starts the abandoned road that moves to great utopia. He talks about how we abandoned the road that we were on that took us to this place, abandon the road of liberalism for the road to the great utopia, because we believe this is the promised land out there, that only if we give the power to these people, they will lead us there. Right. Then it goes to individualism and collectivism, tells how the individual and the collective, sometimes there's a bit of trade-off there. Then it's good to work for the collective. It's good to work for the individual. But as policies, these two cannot coexist together very well. I mean, there's some nuances in there, but we can't give up our individuality for the collective, because we think that's a safer option.
And the degree to which a person does is often in service of their own individual goal. I think that might be something he mentions later in Planning and Democracy, but the degrees in which people are willing to get on board with a plan collectively it's a plan whose outcome is not specific to everyone. It's a plan that leads to a means that helps each person achieve something different for them as an individual.
Yeah, for sure. And then he gets on to the next chapter, which is the inevitability of planning. This is the belief that it's what's inevitable, right? We can't have a bunch of random people with their own individual plans bumping around, creating all this chaos. It's never going to work. We need to create order. Creating order is centralizing this power into planning. And this is off a chapter that he goes into the experts, which is just that was like my second one to all the redefinition of words. Is like he understood the power of the experts and the single-minded experts. Yep. I have a whole quote here, but it's just at the end. He says, from the saintly to the single-minded idealist to the fanatic is often but a step. One step between those two. A good, well-meaning expert. You can say Dr. Fauci is the reincarnation of Mother Teresa himself. It doesn't matter, because when you're single-minded, you have this one goal, you have one aim, it's your one job to get rid of COVID, and you're willing to do anything necessary. Especially, you might not go in there thinking you're going to do anything necessary to get rid of it, but once your frustration builds because something isn't happening, right? The Delta variant came. You have all these, everyone's looking up to you to have a solution for them. You are much more willing to do all these different things, all these different means to create the end of ending COVID. And sometimes the ends just means a lot less people, a lot less freedom. And that's just the way you get there. Again, I'm not putting anything on Dr. Fauci here that he's a bad person. You can make your mind up on that opinion yourself. But what I'm saying is the experts here, the experts are something you can't just give up your power to them to think they'll lead you to the promised land, because it's the same thing as going down the road to the great utopia. It's not there. You have to control your life if you want to end up, being a fully functioning human being in a liberal society. Next chapter, we already got into this planning democracy. These two can't really exist. A good thing, a good little quote here is when a democracy comes dominated by a collectivist creed, democracy will inevitably destroy itself. Even democracy can destroy itself when infected by this parasite that is planning. The next one,
or they will redefine democracy to mean just the application of collectivism, which is one thing that they've done and they will continue to do. Yeah.
I mean, talk about the redefinition. He name drops democratic socialism because that started to become a thing in 1944 after fascism didn't work, ironically. Next one, planning the rule all. We just went through that one, creating arbitrary law to equalize these outcomes to get to your goals. You just got to treat different groups differently. Next one is economic control and totalitarianism. This is the one where he talks about we just want to control the economic sphere.
Just this one thing. This one thing.
A very, very small thing. You don't have to worry about work. We'll give you a job, we'll give you your clothes, we'll give you a house, and then when they control those things, we'll give you healthcare. When they control those things, then they control those things. If they give it to you, they can take it away just as easily. The next chapter after this was whom. So this was the only chapter that's like the title kind of confused me until he explained that it was actually a Lenin quote about the universal problem of social society, in which he explains, Lenin asks who plans whom, who directs and dominates who assigns to
who
other people their station
whom,
in life.
Basically,
exactly.
It's who's being coerced and who applies the coercion.
If we're gonna follow the leader, we got to figure out who the leader is first.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes that leaders will go right into a ditch. Chapter 9, security and freedom. This is an awesome chapter, but this is actually one that we started to get our first big disagreement with Hayek, but we think he probably think differently. So he distinguishes limited freedom and limited security and absolute security, where he says sometimes there are matters in which you need to have limited security out there, but I don't think, and he used like monetary policy and something else that is like, if you're around today, he'd be like, oh yeah, no, I was wrong. This is awful, because even this small little bit of limited security is going to balloon up to absolute security or make people reliant on those policies. And I don't think he would probably agree with his own stance there. But the good thing is he actually thought about these things and it's rejected on hand. And then the last chapter is why the worst get on top. I think we hit that over the head a little bit today. But another thing we didn't hit on is the particularism. The collectivism inevitably becomes particularist. It becomes nationalist. It becomes anti-racist. It becomes all these different things that it must put on its banner in order to get enough people to follow it.
We did kind of hit on it because it's in that introduction, right? Where he said that's that in Hayek lamented how Western democracies were increasingly circumventing the spirit of liberal constitutionalism by passing coercive legislation, typically under the guise of achieving social justice, but in reality, serving well-organized coalitions of special interests, aka particular groups, because they can only ever serve these small particular groups. Yeah, and that's a well-organized minority will always be able to rule over an unorganized majority. But that's exactly right. The particularism, it's a further teasing out of the whom thing, I think, really. Yeah. It's like which particular group is going to be served here, either ostensibly or really.
Yeah. And I really like that chapter 10. There's just so much good stuff in there that I wish we'd just done a second review of that one, but just reiterating why the worst get on top, because it's inevitable. Like why would there be any other option there? And he actually has another quote by someone else in here that does a great job by Frank K. Knight. He said, quote, "They would have us do things do these things whether they wanted or whether we wanted to or not, and the probability of people in power being the individuals who dislike the possession and exercise of power is on the level of the probability that the extremely tender-hearted person would get a job as whipping master in a slave plantation.
Yep.
The kind of precursor to that is like you have to do some bad things to people who you perceive as bad.
Force or failure. Pick.
Exactly. It's like the people who are throwing people in gas chambers, the people, you know, who were at the head of the firing squad. Those are people who had to volunteer for that job. Are those people going to be the kind-hearted people that you want leading a country? No, they're not going to be. No. And that's what happens. It turns good people, otherwise who would be good people, into bad people because they just get used to this horrible condition. And, you know, the people who are unwilling to change, those are the first people who get shot in the back of the head when you're going through, you know, this violent revolution to take planning. You know, we've seen it time and time again, and we I think we do a pretty good job at keeping it light and humorous for a lot of the stuff. But as I mentioned in the last episode, you know, if we wouldn't make jokes, if we wouldn't, you know, do the best we can to add some humor to this, you'd start crying, because this is a review of the greatest atrocities that have happened, certainly in recent human history, but
and
it's
the
certainly
ideology,
the heaviest scale. Yeah, I mean, there's some horrible things that have happened, you know, in the long ago past. But just like as we said in World War I, these really efficient tools to kill people made it super horrifying. We have more efficient tools now to truly oppress people than we ever had before. And by going down the road to serfdom, to servitude, it's just using these efficient tools. It's using Twitter, an efficient tool to control the public discourse. It's using the CDC to push down COVID policy down on people who don't agree with it. It's so many things of a large coercive government that has all these avenues for power to truly hurt the people. Now we saw what happened, you know, in Mao's China. You know, through the 20th century, we saw these collectivist policies kill around 100 million people. Imagine what happens next time it wheels its head around. It can be a lot worse. So that's why this book is important. That's why we hope these reviews get out to more people. As much as we try to be lighthearted about it, it's because we have to. But, you know, I hope everyone listening or who will listen to this will go check it out.
Yeah. And I think that you worded that perfectly, Kevin. These are serious ideas that they have to be taken seriously. You know, like you said, it's not like libtards or something, you know, even just getting past, it's like the way that's been hijacked. It's like, we have to take it seriously. To me, the fact that like hammer and sickles are not viewed with the same disdain and disgust and this moral revulsion as a swastika is a testament to just the power of like that red washing of history, and why we still have to keep having these conversations. Like, we're not relitigating Nazism, right? Like, we know it's evil, but we're having to relitigate these ideas that actually, again, they're just, you know, like he says, fascism and Stalinism and Nazism are all different parts of collectivism. They're all a species. Sorry. They're all a strain of the same school of thought of this collectivist ideology. And the point that Hayek makes is that they might have, even with planning, they might have different goals that they're moving towards, but they don't, like, regardless of what those goals are that they claim are different, the motivations or impetus for implementing these systems, it doesn't matter. They all go to the same place. And that's why they all are having the same results, whether it's, you know, some fascist thing or Marxism or whatever. You know, Hitler didn't like the communists and vice versa, but they were doing just, it's like just you're, you might not be in the same band, but you're singing the genre of music, you know? And so it's the genre is human screaming. So, all right, buddy. Why don't you take us out? Tell people where they can find all the things. I'm gonna pass out. I bet you I will be asleep less than 10 minutes from now. I bet you actually less than 7 minutes from now, depending on how long our outro lasts.
I'm gonna drag this out to 7 minutes just to see if that happens.
Please don't.
No, we appreciate you guys watching. This is the, I think, 10th episode of the total series. We'll start up again on Monday with episode 11. That's going to be covering chapter 11, but you can find all the previous episodes and these episodes on the Return to Reason Locals community is the best place to get it, I think. So returntoreason.locals.com. So you can find Truman, support Truman. He's got live streaming on there now. He's got all these cool things. He's got a couple of really awesome interviews he's talked about. Like, I'm more excited about them than I think he might be. So stay tuned for that stuff. Also, obviously on Thinkspot, quick shout out to Thinkspot. I know we had some technical issues today, but we're really gracious to the Thinkspot team, Azim, Robert, Nancy, and everyone else on the team. You guys have been wonderful. So we really appreciate this opportunity. So we hope it goes up there, but you can check out Return to Reason there. You can check out Return to Reason on Twitter at My Mundane Mind, and Return to Reason on YouTube. Obviously, you're watching it now on YouTube, or you might be watching it later on some other streaming service, but find you on Medium as well for written content. As for me, you can find Engineering Politics, engineeringpolitics.locals.com. You'll find this is an Engineering Politics episode as well. Find me on Thinkspot Engineering Politics. I'm on Twitter at ENG_politics. I am on YouTube and Medium for written content as well by just searching Engineering Politics. I think that's it.
Yeah, there's one thing there. You said that the best place to watch this would be on my YouTube. I disagree, because yours is criminally under sub to, so people should go and sub to yours before they sub to mine, because you're criminally undersubbed and underfollowed on Twitter, in my opinion. So people should join all of those things. So all right, that was good, Kevin. Thank you for keeping that going there. I'm fading, buddy. I'm fading. One Heineken. I went to high school with this girl. We called her One Beer, because she would just one beer would get her. But this isn't it. It's the fact that I've had maybe like 10 hours sleep in the last 3 or 4 days. I'm gonna be done. So thank you everyone for watching.
Yes, this episode is dedicated to One Beer. You know you are.